Shalom Aleichem, Mishpachim. I'm coming to you with Torah reading with Ankelos on the Torah. We are in the fifth Torah reading, the fifth Aliyah of the portion of Vayishlach. All right, I believe, so let us begin. This is Ankelos on the Torah. All right, so we are starting with I believe 34. Hold on, let me check 1 second. Let me check. I believe verse 6. No, I'm sorry. 34 verse 1. Verse 1, way up here. Torah up here. Ankelos down here. All right. 34 verse 1. Torah. Dinah, Leah's daughter, who was born to Jacob, went out to look at the women of the land. Verse 1. And this is Ankelos. Dinah, Leah's daughter, went out. Scripture mentions Dinah's parents in this narrative with beautiful symmetry. But Rashi and Nachmanides do not focus on the poetic methodology and find special meanings here. Rashi contends that the wording daughter of Leah instead of Jacob is intended to remind us that Leah was also accustomed to going out. As the Bible states, Leah went out to meet him. Chapter 30, verse 16. Thus, like mother, like daughter in Yechezkel, Nachmanides suggests that the reference to Leah foreshadows that other children of Leah will avenge Dinah's defilement in verses 25 through 31. Arnold Bay Earlrich in Mikra Ki Feschuto proposes that this episode is recorded in Scripture to emphasize how much the patriarchs did not want to intermarry with the Canaanites. He also notes that this episode could not have occurred when Jacob was returning from his stay with Laban because Dinah was only about 4 years old at that time. Verse 2, Torah. Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the chief of the land, saw her, took her, lay with her, and afflicted her. Verse 2, Ankelos. Afflicted her. What is the significance of afflicted her? Ankelos is literal, but others explain the term. The Saadia Gaon states that it is a euphemism for sexual intercourse. According to Ibn Ezra and Radak, the phrase suggests that Dinah was afflicted with pain because she was a virgin. Nachmanides interprets the term as raped, and Rashi as abnormal sex. Verse 3, Torah. He was pleased with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke to the girl's heart. Verse 3, Ankelos. He was pleased. The biblical noun nefesh in this opening phrase, as elsewhere in Scripture, signifies body and does not hold the modern meaning of soul. Ankelos retains nefesh without clarification, but explains the metaphor clung as pleased. Spoke to the girl's heart. Our Targumist does not explain the metaphoric phrase, which could mean an attempt to persuade by argument. The Saadia Gaon and even Ezra see it as denoting comforting words that affect and alter one's feelings. Rashi and Radak supply the comforting words from the next passage. Shechem assured her that he would marry her. The biblical Hebrew consonants read na'ar, boy. Yet our Targumist renders girl, as indicated in the Masoretic vocalization. Biblical Hebrew is not particular with regard to the gender of words. Ibn Kaspi. Torah, verse 4. Shechem said to Hamor, his father, saying, "Take this girl for me as a wife." Verse 4, Ankelos. Take. The Hebrew root lakach, took, is used in verse 2 for the abduction of Dinah and in verses 17 and 26 for her rescue. The Targumist renders these instances as usual, as led, so as to avoid an association with inanimate objects, which can be taken. Here, in verse 4, the Targumist does not change the verb, either because he wanted to emphasize that Shechem was thinking of abducting Dinah by unconsensual force, or more likely because taking here denotes taking as a wife, as in all of these verses. So, verse 5, Torah. Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, while his sons were in the field with his cattle, but Jacob kept silent until they came. Verse 5, Onkelos. Jacob kept silent. Radak observes that Jacob was not only silent now, but even later, except to criticize his sons. Verse 6, Torah. Hamor, Shechem's father, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Verse 6, Onkelos. Hamor went out. Sforno proposes that Hamor interpreted Jacob's silence as anger and a desire to harm him, so he prudently stopped pleading for Dinah and cautiously hurried out. Verse 7, Torah. Jacob's sons came from the field when they heard this. The men were distressed and very angry, for he had committed a disgraceful act in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, and it is not proper for such a thing to be done. Verse 7, Onkelos, proper. It is not proper for such a thing to be done. The Aramaic frequently inserts kasher, which means proper or suitable, which is implied in the Hebrew idiom. See, for example, chapter 24, verse 23, 25, and 31. Nachmanides contends that the Targumic addition was placed in the translation to emphasize that among the Israelites, what Shechem did was a forbidden act. The Bible seemingly anachronistic phrase, a disgraceful thing in Israel. Anachronistic because the nation of Israel did not yet exist. Is not clarified by the Targum, but Radak adds seed of Israel, meaning Jacob's later descendants. Verse 8, Torah. Hamor spoke with them, saying, My son Shechem is pleased with your daughter. Give her now to him as a wife. Verse 8, Onkelos. Pleased in the biblical understanding, cleaved. See commentary in verse 3. Verse 9, Torah. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. Verse 9, Onkelos. Intermarry with us. Onkelos and Radak translate the irregular Hebrew otanu as with, meaning with us. Give us your daughter. Give us your daughters. Rashbam here in Rashi on verse 16 observe that when speaking to Jacob and his sons, Hamor makes it seem as if the giving and the taking of wives would be at Jacob's family's discretion. But when he tries to convince his own townspeople of the worthwhileness of the plan in verse 21, he argues that they would be the givers and takers. Verse 10, Torah. Dwell with us, and the land will be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire holdings in it. Verse 10, Onkelos. Trade in it. The biblical meaning of sachar is moved about. The Targum gives it its modern meaning of trade. Verse 11, Torah. Shechem said to her father and brothers, Let me find favor in your eyes. Whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me of a high bride price and gifts. I will give whatever you tell me, but give me the girl for a wife. Verse 12, Onkelos, bride price. The noun mohar is pluralized by our Targumist, but, as with many other concepts, he does not explain it. Rashi and Nachmanides define it differently. Rashi holds that it is a marriage contract that stipulates that upon the death of the husband or upon divorce, the wife will receive a specific designated payment. Nachmanides maintains that it is a gift given to a bride at the time of the marriage. The phrase bride price and gifts could be understood as a hendiadis, a figure of speech where a single idea is expressed by two words connected with a conjunction such as and. Thus, only one thing was offered. However, Nachmanides considers gifts as other presents given to the father and brothers. Verse 13, Torah. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor with wisdom. They spoke because he had defiled their sister Dinah. Verse 13, Unkelos. Wisdom. The Targumist alters deceit here, as in chapter 27, verse 35, to protect the dignity and morality of the Jewish ancestors. Sforno, Chazkuni, and Bechar Shchar suggest that this was not a plan to kill the city of inhabitants, but a strategy to avoid having Dinah marry Shechem. Jacob's sons thought that their proposal would be rejected by either Shechem or the city inhabitants. All right. Verse 14, Torah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to an uncircumcised man, for that is a disgrace to us. But on this condition we will consent to you, if you will be like us by circumcising every male among you. We will then give our daughters to you and take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and be one people. But if you do not accept this from us to become circumcised, then we will lead our daughter and go." Verse 17, Unkelos. Except. Where appropriate, as in verse 24 too, the Targum explains the metaphor here with its intention, accept, to accept. Lead. Unkelos usually replaces the verb take with lead when it is used for animate beings to preclude the unseemly thought that the people were rudely mishandled. Verse 18, Torah. Their words were good in the eyes of Hamor and in the eyes of Shechem, Hamor's son. The youth did not delay to do the thing, for he wanted Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored in his father's house. Verse 19, Unkelos. Delay. Ibn Ezra and Rashbam note the unusual biblical verbal construct echar, which is also found in chapter 32, verse 5. The Targum renders each occurrence as required by the context, using the past tense in chapter 32. Most honored. What is the significance of this description? According to Radak and Bechor Shchor, it refers to his civic authority to convince the city inhabitants. Sforno maintains that it is stated in irony, showing his intense anxiety to have Dinah. Although he was most honored, he rushed precipitously to circumcise himself. Verse 20, Torah. Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of their city and spoke with the men of their city, saying, verse 20, Unkelos, spoke with the men. Our Targumist, as usual, uses the preposition with following spoke, signifying a more dignified conversation. Verse 21, Torah. These men act peacefully with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters for ourselves and wives, and we will give our daughters to them. Verse 21, Unkelos. Trade in it. The biblical understanding is move about. See commentary on verse 10. All right, that was 21. Verse 22, Torah. Only so will the men consent to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Verse 23, Torah. Would not their cattle, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, so that they will live with us. Verse 23, Unkelos, be ours. Even Ezra sees this argument as evidence of evil designs on Jacob's wealth, but Arnold B. Earlich takes Hamor and Shechem to mean that the city inhabitants would be able to secure greater wealth with the help of Jacob's family. Verse 24, Torah. All who went out of the gate of the city accepted it from Hamor and Shechem his son, and all who went out of the gate of the city circumcised all the males. Verse 24, Unkelos, went out of the gate of the city. What does went out denote? Chazkuni maintains that the implication is that people wanted to flee rather than be circumcised, but they were hindered from doing so. In chapter 23, verse 10, the phrase, all who entered the gate, denotes those who came to show kindness to Sarah. In contrast, Ehrlich interprets went out as a description of the young city inhabitants who, when necessary, would go out to war. They were willing to circumcise themselves in order to secure wives from Jacob's household. Accepted in the biblical understanding is heard. The biblical understanding is heard. See commentary on verse 17. Verse 25, Torah. It happened on the third day, when their pain was severe on them, that the two sons of Jacob, Shimon and Levi, brothers of Dinah, took each his sword and came upon the city that sat in security, and slew all the males. Verse 25, Onkelos, was severe on them. The biblical understanding of this is when they were in pain. Onkelos explains why the brothers postponed their attack until the third day. The pain was more severe and incapacitating on the third day following the circumcision. This is also the view of Ibn Ezra, Radak, Bechor Shchor, and the Babylonian Talmud, and Shabbat 134b. The Jerusalem Talmud, Shabbat 19:3 and 16d, and Genesis Rabbah. However, Chazkuni suggests that 3 days is mentioned because it took 3 days for all the city's males to be circumcised. Sat in security, Onkelos, and the Saadia Gaon and Rashba maintain that security refers to the city, but Rashi in Genesis Rabbah and Neophiti and Pseudo Jonathan contend that it describes the mood of the brothers. Either way, the sense is that the brothers were confident of success because of the immobility of the city inhabitants. Slew all the males. Chazkuni justifies the act. All the city males were guilty because they witnessed Dinah's kidnapping and rape and did nothing to stop it. Alternatively, he continues, this was a preemptive strike by the brothers because the city inhabitants were planning to plunder their wealth. Verse 26, Torah. They slew Hamor and Shechem with his son with the edge of the sword, and they led Dinah out of Shechem's house and left. Verse 26, Onkelos. With the edge of the sword. Onkelos renders scriptures lefi cherev literally. The literal meaning of the idiom is with the mouth or word of the sword. Jastro, dictionary, translates it according to the laws of war. Led, focusing on the harsh nature of the Hebrew word took. Genesis Rabbah opines that Shimon and Levi had to remove Dinah from Shechem's house by force. She did not want to leave. One explanation in the Midrash is that she loved Shechem. A second is that she was ashamed to appear in public and only agreed to leave when Shimon swore that he would marry her. Onkelos avoids commenting on Dinah's motives by simply rendering the word took as led. The customary Targumic replacement when the Bible's understanding of take concerns animate beings, to escape the view that the individual is being mishandled. All right. We'll go ahead and read the Onkelos highlights for chapter 34. Onkelos frequently exchanges the somewhat vague biblical idiom, it may not be done. For its intended meaning, it is not proper. It is clear that the acts that are being referred to in the Bible could be done, but should not be. The simple purpose of clarifying the text by means of these Targumic additions, see chapter 24, verse 23, 25, 31, and chapter 34, verse 7, for example, can easily be validated by reviewing how the words, it is not proper, are used in other verses. It is interesting to note that Nachmanides did not make such a comparison with other verses when commenting on chapter 34, verse 7. He seems to have overlooked the many other appearances of proper in the Targum and interpretively construes the Aramaic of this particular verse to mean 1. The heinous practice of raping a girl was approved by Canaanite law, and 2. It is forbidden in Jacob's family. Beyond the text, the story of the assault on Dinah by Shechem and the reprisal of Shimon and Levi on all the male inhabitants of the community occupies the attention of many commentators. Could Dinah have prevented the incident by not going out to look at the women of the land? Or, as is too often the case in rape crimes, are we attempting, by raising the question, to unfairly lay the blame on the victim? Apparently, Shechem's act was not simply an act of violence motivated by lust, since he wished to marry Dinah. Does that vindicate him? Why did Jacob's sons conceal their plan of revenge from their father? Was it so that Jacob could not be blamed for the action they took? Was that appropriate or smart, since Jacob learned of the slaughter, at any rate, and remonstrated against it in chapter 34, verse 30, and chapter 49, verse 5? Beyond the text. Do you feel that the punishment meted out by Shimon and Levi fit Shechem's crime? Weren't innocent people killed? Some sages suggest that the community also bore responsibility for Shechem's crime, since they did not punish him. Do you agree? What about the deceitful manner in which Jacob's sons conducted the negotiations? Was that something to be proud of? Or are there no rules or boundaries in the conduct of war? Was Jacob's response in chapter 34, verse 30, a proper reproof of Shimon and Levi? Jacob complained that his sons caused trouble and hostility between him and the inhabitants of the land. Shouldn't Jacob have said, "You were morally wrong in doing what you did. There was no ethical justification for your heinous action"? Why does the Bible include this narrative, even though it may not reflect well upon the ancestors of the Jewish people? Ponder this. Chapter 34, verse 27. The sons of Jacob came, this is Torah, the sons of Jacob came to strip the slain. They plundered the city and defiled their sister. 27. Unkelos, strip the slain. The Aramaic clarified scriptures came on the slain by supplying the implied to strip and deleting the word on, thereby explaining Jacob's son's intent. 28. Torah. They plundered their sheep, cattle, asses, and what was in the city of the field. Verse 28. Unkelos, plundered. Unkelos exchanges scriptures somewhat imprecise word meaning took with the more graphic word plundered, which is the biblical verb in verses 27 and 29. Verse 29, Torah. All their possessions, all their young children, their wives, and all in the house they took as captives and plunder. Verse 29, Unkelos, in the house. The biblical singular form of the word house is retained in the Aramaic translation. Ibn Ezra contends that the singular may refer to the house of Shechem or Hamor. However, the Saadia Gaon and Radak remind us that the biblical singular can be understood as the plural house and thereby refers to all the city houses. Verse 30, Torah. Then Jacob said to Shimon and Levi, "You have brought me trouble by placing hostility between me and the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, while I have few people. So if they gather against me and attack me, I and the members of my household will be destroyed." Verse 30. To Onkelos, by placing hostility between me and the inhabitants of the land. Our Targumist explains the colorful biblical metaphor of by making me a bad odor among the inhabitants of the land. Ibn Ezra and Radak write, "They will hate me just as a person hates a malodorous object." Sforno adds the reason. They will say that we lied about what we promised we would do after they circumcised themselves. Few people. The biblical meaning of the biblical word is metei mispar. Ibn Ezra defines metei as people and mispar as number. He states that which can be numbered is small. Therefore, this is an idiom that means few people. Verse 31. And this is Torah. They said, "Should our sister be treated like a harlot?" Verse 31. Our sister, a harlot. The brothers took the position that a person should be willing to give his life to preserve his honor. Arnold B. Ehrlich. Onkelos substitutes two Aramaic words as a euphemism for the Bible's word meaning harlot. They literally mean one who goes outside. The same euphemism is applied to Tamar, the ancestress of King David, in chapter 38, verse 15. Both protect these Israelite ancestresses from the demeaning notion that they acted as common prostitutes. There are Onkelos texts that have im which may suggest that Dinah was an accomplice with Shechem in the sexual union. However, our Onkelos text substitutes the prefix lamed, to which explicitly asserts and not only suggests that Dinah was not an accomplice in the dastardly act. All right. I think. All right. Verse 1, Torah, chapter 35. The Lord said to Jacob, "Arise, go to Bethel, and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who revealed himself to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." Verse 1. Onkelos, Lord. Bible, the biblical word is Elohim. See commentary on chapter 1, verse 1. Radak softens the anthropomorphism ever so slightly by having an angel, not God, instruct Jacob to travel to Bethel and fulfill the vow that he made in chapter 28, verse 22, to build an altar and give tithes. Maimonides, as usual, considers this encounter a dream in his Guide of the Perplexed. Rashi quotes the Midrash Tanhuma and contends that Jacob was punished by having to endure the violation of Dinah because he did not hurry to fulfill his vow at Bethel. In contrast, on chapter 32, verse 23, Rashi quotes Genesis Rabbah's view that Jacob was punished with the agony of Dinah's rape because he prevented her from marrying Esau and exerting a good wife's benign influence on him. Chazkuni reconciles the two conflicting midrashic views by suggesting that Jacob's two mistakes were intertwined. He took a roundabout route to avoid Esau and the possibility of his marriage with Dinah, and the elongated trip caused Jacob's delay in going to Bethel to fulfill his vow. In contrast, Maimonides contends that God does not interfere in this way to punish people. Evil is caused either by the laws of nature, which work for the overall good of the world, by what person does to another, or by what one does to himself. Dwell there. Nachmanides sees no clear biblical statement explaining the purpose of Jacob's sojourn in Bethel. He and Sforno speculates, among other ideas, that the stay provided him an opportunity to purify his family from the idolatry that surrounded him in Laban's house, or from the contact with the corpses resulting from the slaughter wrought by his sons, a foreshadowing of the law of cleanliness in Numbers chapter 31, verse 19. However, Radak suggests that the stay gave him time to fulfill his promise of chapter 28, verse 22. Revealed himself. Onkelos removes and explains the biblical anthropomorphism as who appeared. Verse 2, Torah. Jacob said to the people of his house and to all who are with him, "Remove the idols of the nations that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments." Verse 2, Onkelos. People of his house. The Targum supplies the implied object of people, which does not appear in the biblical text as in Exodus 1:1 and elsewhere. Radak supposes that Jacob was addressing his children, while all who were with him were his menservants and maidservants, idols of the nations. Our Targumist avoids even the suggestion that idols are divine. Therefore, he replaces the biblical foreign word or strange gods with idols, literally the errors of the nations. Here in verse 4, according to Rashi. According to Rashi, Sforno and Rashbam, these were the idols plundered by Jacob's sons from the city of Shechem. Radak explains that the gold and silver plundered from Shechem were inscribed with idols. Thus, even though they were not used in idol worship, it was improper to retain them, as indicated in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 25, and chapter 13, verse 18. According to Rashi, Jacob's sons must wash themselves after touching idols and discard any clothing used in their worship. Bechor Shchor states that it was improper to bring these despicable things into the Holy Land. Change your garments. Into the Holy Land. Change your garments. These were either the garments used in idol worship or clothing stripped from the corpses. Radak. This command teaches us that every Jew who wants to worship in a holy place must have a clean body and clean clothes. Ibn Ezra. Verse 3, Torah. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel. I will make an altar there to God who accepts my prayer on the day of my distress and whose memra, word of wisdom, is my support on the way I have gone. Verse 3, Onkelos, accepts my prayer. The Aramaic avoids scriptures anthropomorphic of who answers me, whose memra, word, or wisdom is my support. The Targum circumvents the Bible's anthropomorphism and is with me. Verse 4, Torah, they gave Jacob all the idols of the nations that were in their hands and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob buried them under the terebinth that was near Shechem. Verse 4, Onkelos, idols of the nations. See commentary on verse 2. Their hands. This is a metaphor for in their possession, which the Targum leaves unexplained. In their ears. There refers to the rings in the ears of the idols. Chazkuni and Bechor Shchor. Jacob buried them. Radak explains that Jacob insisted on burial, for he refused to allow the idols to lie strewn on the ground, lest they be found and utilized. However, Nachmanides notes that rabbinical law in the Babylonian Talmud in Avodah Zarah 43b later prohibited the burial of objects used in idolatry and required that they be totally destroyed, ground up and dispersed or cast into the sea. How Nachmanides wonders, could the patriarch Jacob violate this later Talmudic rule? He and Sforno imagine that someone must have nullified the idols' sanctity, removing the stigma of idolatry and allowing them to be used. But Jacob, in an act of piety, ordered them to be buried near Shechem. The biblical understanding word is im Shechem, literally with Shechem. Onkelos retains the biblical phrase which Rashi and Radak translate as near Shechem. Verse 5, Torah. They journeyed, and there was fear from before the Lord on the people that were in the cities around them. They did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Verse 5, Onkelos. Fear from before the Lord. Onkelos reinterprets Scripture's meaning word of a terror from God or God's terror in two ways. One, the implied from before is added to preclude anthropomorphic notion that God has terror. And two, Elohim is replaced by the Tetragrammaton, as in 1:1:1 and elsewhere in Genesis 1:1 and elsewhere. People, the Aramaic and the Saadia Gaon add this implied noun, the people, not the cities, were frightened. See also the commentary on verse 2. Verse 6. Torah, Jacob came to Luz, that is, Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. Verse 7, Torah, he built an altar there and called the place Bethel, for the Lord revealed himself to him there when he fled from his brother. Verse 7, Onkelos, he built an altar there. He fulfilled his promise of chapter 28, verse 22, Radak. The Lord revealed himself. The Targumist changes Scripture's Elohim to the Tetragrammaton, as in Genesis 1:1 and elsewhere. The Bible uses the plural form for revealed. They were revealed, but the Targumist and Saadia Gaon, understanding the reference to be to the Lord, substitute the singular. Rashi and Ibn Kaspi comment that biblical plural lords occurs frequently, such as in chapter 39, verse 30, in Bereishit, where it refers to Joseph's master. It is nothing more than a majestic plural, and it may be accompanied by a pluralized verb. Ibn Ezra, Radak, and Chazkuni contend that our passage is speaking of the angels, meaning in plural, mentioned in chapter 28, verse 12, and chapter 32, verse 2. It should also be recalled that the use of the plural may not be of primary significance, since Scripture frequently uses the plural in situations where the singular would seem to make more sense. Verse 8, Torah, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. She was buried below Bethel, at the edge of the plain, so its name was called the Plain of Weeping. Verse 8, Deborah, Onkelos, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. Nachmanides queries why this verse intrudes in the narrative. Citing Genesis Rabbah, he states that the phrase alludes to the death of Rebekah, and that explains why the place is called the Plain of Weeping. Scripture does not mention her death explicitly because, as recorded in the Midrash Tanchuma, she was not accorded proper honor at her burial. Isaac, who was nearly blind, could not have left his house. Esau refused to attend because he did not forgive her for helping Jacob secure the blessing from Isaac, and Jacob was away. So the Hittites buried her at night. Radach, Bechor Shkor, and Chazkuni theorized more pragmatically that the passage alludes to the fact that Rebekah fulfilled her promise in chapter 27, verse 45, that she would send for Jacob to inform him when he should return. Deborah was the messenger. Even more realistically, Ehrlich speculates that Deborah did not die at this time. Scripture mentions the fact that she died and was buried in this area sometime past because Jacob and his party were passing her gravesite. Edge of the plain. The biblical understanding is Torah-5th. Twice. The Aramaic clarifies that the Hebrew under the Torah-5th is not literally beneath the plain, but as its outer edge. The Sadia Gon is similar with on the edge of Bethel under the plain. Verse 9, Torah. The Lord revealed himself to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. Verse 10, Torah. The Lord said to him, "Your name is Jacob. Your name will no longer be called Jacob, but your name will be called Israel." Thus he called his name Israel. Verse 11, Torah. The Lord said to him, "I am El Shaddai. Be numerous and increase. A nation and an assembly of tribes will come from you, and kings who will rule over nations will go out from you." Verse 9, Unkelos. Lord, meaning in the biblical meaning Elohim, here and in verses 10, 11, 13, 15. Verse 10, Unkelos. While our Targumist is silent, the Sadia Gon, Ibn Ezra, Hananel, Nachmanides, Bechor Schor, and Chazkuni clarify, your name will no longer be called Jacob alone, but also Israel. The name Jacob implies deception and trickery, whereas the name Israel suggests prince and nobleman. Rashi. Maimonides states that this was a dream. Verse 11, Ankelos. El Shaddai, in a play on the meaning of the word Shaddai, Rashi explains, I, God, am Kedai, fully able to bless, for blessings are mine to give. See commentary on chapter 17, verse 1 regarding, Numerous. The biblical understanding is fruitful. See commentaries, Assembly of tribes. The biblical understanding is assembly of nations. And kings who will rule over nations will go out from you. The biblical understanding is, and kings will go out from your loins. Onkelos adds, who will rule over nations, as in chapter 17, verse 6, and clarifies the metaphor, loins. All right. And that is Onkelos on the Torah. And I have here the daily wisdom, on the Parshiot of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. All right. And that was the 5th reading. I just read chapter 34, verse 1 through chapter 35, verse 11 of the Torah portion, Vayishlach, in the book of Genesis. I will begin reading the wisdom. Jacob and his family proceeded to the city of Shechem, where Jacob bought a parcel of land from the local inhabitants. Jacob's daughter Dinah went out to meet the women of Shechem and was abducted and violated by the prince of Shechem. The king then brazenly suggested that his son and Jacob's clans intermarry. In order to demonstrate that Jewish women must not be violated, Jacob's sons replied that the citizens of Shechem would first have to circumcise themselves, to which they readily agreed. When they were recovering from the circumcision, Jacob's sons, Shimon and Levi, executed all the males who were guilty by complicity in Dinah's violation, and rescued Dinah. The title of this daily wisdom on the Parshiot is called Achieving Maturity. Jacob's 2 sons, Shimon and Levi, took up each man his sword. Shimon and Levi are referred to here as men, even though they were only 13 years old at the time. For this reason, this verse is cited by some Talmudic sages as the source for the notion that a boy becomes bar mitzvah. That is, he matures sufficiently to be obligated to practice all of God's commandments at the age of 13. But significantly, the Torah refers to Shimon and Levi as men, specifically in the context of their selfless and even self-endangering defense of morality. This teaches us that our observance of God's commandments and even our mature rational appreciation for them must be based upon a supra-rational and selfless commitment to morality. All right, ponder on that. And this is the daily wisdom on the Lubavitcher Rebbe, on the Parshiot of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. All right. Laila Tov.